He paid her debts anonymously, she found him. I don't accept charity, your grace. The offices of Hartley and Sons smelled of wool and ink and the particular mustiness of old ledgers that had absorbed decades of London's coal smoke. Rosalind Thorne had grown fond of that smell over the past 2 years, though she would never have admitted it. It was the smell of survival, of the narrow desk wedged between the filing cabinets, where she performed small miracles, with numbers that the senior partners pretended not to notice. She noticed everything. It was her gift and her curse. This morning, she noticed that Mr. Hartley the younger had worn the same cravat 3 days running, which meant his wife was visiting her mother in Bath again. She noticed that the shipment manifests from Leeds had been delayed, which would cause problems with the quarterly accounts. She noticed that the Morning Post had arrived 17 minutes late, and that among the usual bills and business correspondence sat a letter addressed to her personally, bearing the seal of Whitmore and Associates, the bank that held her father's remaining debts. Her stomach tightened. She knew that seal too well. For 3 years it had appeared on quarterly statements, reminding her of the 847 still outstanding, the weight that pressed on her chest every night before sleep, the number that governed every decision she made. She could recite the payment schedule from memory, 12,000 per quarter, which meant another 17 years before she was free. She would be 43 years old. Timothy would be 35. Perhaps by then he would have established himself well enough that her scandalous employment would no longer taint his prospects. She slit the envelope with her penknife, expecting the usual statement. The words swam before her eyes. She read them again, a third time. We write to inform you that the outstanding balance on the account of the late Mr. Harold Thorne has been paid in full. Please find enclosed documentation confirming the closure of this debt. We thank you for your diligent attention to the payment schedule and wish you well in your future endeavours. Paid in full. Rosalind's hands began to shake. She pressed them flat against the desk, willing them to stillness. But the tremor had moved into her chest, her throat, the backs of her eyes. 3 years of counting every penny, of mending her stockings until they were more darning than original fabric, of refusing invitations she couldn't afford to reciprocate, of lying awake calculating whether she could spare an extra shilling for Timothy's books gone. The debt was gone. She should feel relieved, grateful. She should want to weep with joy, to run through the streets shouting her freedom. Instead, cold fury coiled in her belly. Paid in full, not by her. She had not paid it. She had not earned this freedom. Someone, some stranger, some interfering, condescending stranger, had decided that Rosalind Thorne needed rescuing. Her vision narrowed to a single burning point, the line at the bottom of the document. Payment received from anonymous benefactor via Webb and Associates, solicitors. She knew that name. Everyone in London's merchant community knew Cornelius Webb. He was the man who handled delicate matters for delicate clients, the quiet transfer of funds that must never be traced, the anonymous donations to foundling hospitals, the settlements paid to inconvenient mistresses. If you wanted money to move invisibly, you went to Webb. But Rosalind Thorne was no charity case. She was not a foundling or a mistress or a pitiable widow. She was a woman who paid her own way, who had clawed her independence from the wreckage of her father's failures, who needed no one's pity and wanted no one's help. She would find out who had done this, and she would make them take it back. Cornelius Webb's offices occupied the 2nd floor of a respectable building on Chancery Lane, the kind of address that whispered discretion rather than shouting wealth. Rosalind climbed the stairs with her chin held high, and her best dress, her only good dress, brushed and pressed within an inch of its life. She had told Mr. Hartley she needed the afternoon for a family matter. It was not precisely a lie. The clerk who guarded Webb's inner sanctum was a thin young man with spectacles and the harried expression of someone who spent his days deflecting inconvenient visitors. He took in Rosalind's appearance, respectable but not fashionable, determined but not wealthy, and his face settled into polite dismissal. "Mr. Webb sees clients by appointment only, miss. If you would like to leave your card—" "I don't have a card." Rosalind smiled, the smile she used when merchants tried to shortchange her on fabric or landlords pretended they hadn't promised repairs. "But I do have a matter that I believe Mr. Webb will want to address personally. It concerns a payment made through his offices, a payment I did not authorize and do not accept." The clerk blinked. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "Then please convey my words to Mr. Webb. I'm certain he will." She sat down in the single wooden chair provided for waiting visitors and folded her hands in her lap. The clerk stared at her for a long moment, clearly unused to women who refused to be dismissed. Finally, with a small huff of irritation, he disappeared through the inner door. Rosalind waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned patience in the months after her father's death, when creditors circled like vultures and relatives offered help wrapped in humiliation. She had learned it again in the endless interviews for positions that went to men half as qualified, in the slow climb from copying clerk to assistant bookkeeper to the position she held now, which had no official title because the Hartleys couldn't bring themselves to admit they employed a woman in a skilled role. Patience was a weapon. She wielded it well. The clerk returned, his expression now tinged with curiosity. "Mr. Webb will see you, miss, but he asks me to inform you that he has only a quarter-hour to spare." "A quarter-hour will be sufficient." Cornelius Webb was exactly what she had expected. A small, neat man with silver hair and the carefully blank expression of someone who kept secrets for a living. His office was similarly unremarkable. Dark wood, leather chairs, shelves of legal volumes that looked more decorative than used. The only personal touch was a small portrait of a stern-faced woman on the wall behind his desk, positioned where clients would see it, and perhaps think twice about attempting to deceive her son. "Miss Thorne," Webb gestured to the chair across from his desk, "I confess you have piqued my interest. It is not often that someone comes to my office to complain about receiving money." "I'm not complaining about receiving money, Mr. Webb. I'm demanding to know who sent it so that I might return it." Something flickered in Webb's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "I'm afraid that's quite impossible. The entire purpose of anonymous charitable giving is that it remains anonymous." Charitable giving. The words tasted bitter. Is that what this is? Charity? I would call it generosity. Kindness, perhaps. Someone learned of your situation and wished to ease your burden. Surely that is cause for gratitude rather than indignation. Rosalind leaned forward. "Mr. Webb, 3 years ago my father died, leaving debts I have worked every day to repay. I have sacrificed comfort, security, any hope of a normal life to meet that obligation. I have done it alone, without help, because every offer of help came with conditions. Relatives who wanted me grateful and biddable, employers who thought a desperate woman would accept any terms. I have built my life on the foundation of owing nothing to anyone." She paused, letting the words settle. "And now some stranger has stolen that from me." Webb's expression softened slightly. "Stolen seems a strong word for the erasure of debt." "What would you call it, when someone takes away the thing you've worked hardest to achieve?" He was silent for a long moment. Outside, a carriage clattered past on the street below, and somewhere in the building a door opened and closed. Rosalind held Webb's gaze and refused to look away. "Miss Thorne," he said finally, "I have been in this profession for 37 years. I have facilitated gifts and settlements and payments of every description. And I can tell you that the person who paid your father's debts did so with no expectation of anything in return. They do not want your gratitude. They do not want your submission. They almost certainly never expected to hear your name again. Then they miscalculated. So it would seem. A faint smile crossed Webb's face. You are a remarkably stubborn woman. I prefer determined. Of course you do. He steepled his fingers, considering her. I cannot give you a name. My professional reputation depends on absolute discretion. But I can tell you that if someone were to observe certain details of my office, I could not be held responsible for what conclusions they might draw. Rosalind's eyes swept the room, the legal volumes, the stern portrait, the neat stacks of correspondence on the desk, and there, half hidden beneath a pile of documents, the corner of a letter bearing a crimson seal. The impression was only partially visible, but she could make out what looked like a lion rampant, a coronet above a ducal seal. She didn't recognize the specific arms, but she knew enough of heraldry to identify the rank. Her mysterious benefactor was a duke. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Webb." She rose, her mind already racing. "You have been more helpful than you know." "I rather suspect I have." He stood as well, offering a small bow. "If I may offer one piece of advice, Miss Thorne, when you find what you're looking for, consider that not every gift is an insult. Sometimes kindness is simply kindness." "In my experience, Mr. Webb, kindness always has a price. I prefer to know what it is up front." She left him standing behind his desk, his expression thoughtful, and descended the stairs into the grey London afternoon. A duke. She needed to find a duke whose arms featured a lion rampant, who had some connection to her father's debts, who apparently made a habit of anonymous charitable giving. It was not much to go on, but Rosalind had built her entire professional life on finding patterns in insufficient data. She would find him. The next 3 days passed in a fever of investigation. Rosalind spent her evenings at the subscription library, poring over Burke's Peerage and any book of heraldry she could find. She made careful inquiries among her contacts in the merchant community, the clerks and bookkeepers and junior partners who actually knew how money moved through London's veins. She traced the payment back through Whitmore and Associates to Webb's offices to a trust that had no name, only a number. The trust, she discovered, had made 17 similar payments over the past 3 years. Always debts of middling size, large enough to be crushing for a family of modest means, small enough to be invisible to the truly wealthy. Always for widows or orphans or others without powerful protectors. Always anonymous. Someone was systematically paying off the debts of London's struggling genteel poor. It was strange behaviour for a duke. Dukes, in Rosalind's experience, did not trouble themselves with the financial difficulties of merchants' daughters and widowed seamstresses. Dukes attended Parliament and hunted foxes and married heiresses. They did not the Duke of Ashworth. Rosalind looked up from the ledger she was pretending to study. Mr. Hartley the elder had paused by her desk, frowning at a newspaper. He was a kind man in his vague, distant way, inclined to forget that his bookkeeper was female as long as the numbers balanced. "I beg your pardon, sir?" "Ashworth." Hartley tapped the paper. "They're writing about his speech in the Lords, something about banking reform. Cold fish. That one met him once at a dinner years ago. But he's been solid on trade matters. Not like some of these aristocrats who think commerce is beneath them." "Ashworth," Rosalind repeated carefully. "I don't believe I know the name." "Old title, older money well. It was old money until his father gambled most of it away. The current Duke rebuilt it all from nothing. Made some very clever investments, I understand. Owns half the shipping in Bristol now. Hartley sniffed. Not that anyone gives him credit for it. Too busy calling him cold and unfeeling, as if a man who saves his family from ruin should be cheerful about it. Rosalind's heart had begun to pound, but she kept her voice steady. His father gambled away the family fortune? Nearly. The late Duke was a charming wastrel by all accounts. Left his son with nothing but debts and a title. The boy was only 17 when he inherited. Hartley shook his head. Can you imagine? 17 years old, and suddenly responsible for saving an estate that had been in his family for 300 years. No wonder he grew up hard. 17. The same age Timothy was now. Rosalind thought of her brother, brilliant, hopeful, still young enough to believe the world would be fair, and tried to imagine him facing what this Duke had faced. "Does the Duke of Ashworth have a London residence?" she asked, keeping her tone light, curious. "Ashworth House, I believe, on Grosvenor Square, though I don't suppose he's in town at the moment. Parliament's not in session. Why do you ask?" "Mere curiosity, sir. I saw the name in one of the older ledgers and wondered." Hartley accepted this easily enough and wandered off to his own office. Rosalind waited until he was out of sight, then pulled the newspaper toward her. The article was brief. The Duke of Ashworth had spoken against a proposed banking regulation that would have made it easier for creditors to pursue debtors across county lines. His argument, the paper noted, had been coolly logical, focused on the economic implications rather than any sentimental concern for debtors. The Duke, as always, presented his case with more precision than passion, the writer observed. One might almost forget that Ashworth himself was once on the edge of ruin. So little does he seem to identify with those who struggle. Rosalind read the words twice, her mind working. A duke who had nearly lost everything to debt, who had rebuilt his fortune through clever investment, who was known for coldness, for logic, for a complete absence of sentiment, who, apparently, spent his private hours anonymously paying off the debts of strangers. She had found him. She wrote to the Duke of Ashworth that evening, on the only good stationery she owned. She kept the letter brief and professional. She had reason to believe that he had paid a debt on her behalf, without her knowledge or consent. She wished to discuss the matter and make arrangements for repayment. She was available to meet at his convenience. She did not mention charity. She did not thank him. She simply stated the facts and signed her name. The reply came 3 days later, written by a secretary in formal, dismissive language. His Grace was not in the habit of meeting with strangers regarding financial matters. Any questions about banking or debt should be directed to the appropriate institutions. The Duke wished her well in her endeavours, but was unable to accommodate her request. Rosalind wrote again. This time she was more direct. She knew what he had done. She had traced the payment through Webb's offices, and she would not be put off. She required only a brief meeting to discuss repayment terms. Surely a duke who had once faced debt himself could understand her position. The second reply was shorter. His Grace regretted that his schedule did not permit a meeting. The matter was closed. Rosalind considered her options. She could continue writing, but clearly the Duke's secretary was authorized to refuse her without consultation. She could attempt to approach him at a public event, but she had no access to the world of balls and dinners where dukes spent their time. She could give up and accept the payment as a gift. No. That was not an option at all. There was only one path forward. She would have to go to Ashworth House and refuse to leave until the Duke saw her. It was madness. It was social suicide, not that she had much social standing left to lose. It was exactly the kind of rash, impulsive action her father would have taken, the kind of action she had spent years training herself to avoid. But the alternative was accepting defeat, accepting charity, accepting that her carefully constructed independence could be dismantled by a stranger's whim. She would not. She could not. Ashworth House rose from Grosvenor Square like a monument to old money and older power. The facade was classical, perfectly proportioned, the kind of architecture that whispered rather than shouted its wealth. Rosalind had walked past it before. Without truly seeing it, it was simply part of the landscape of Mayfair, that foreign country where people like her did not belong. Now she climbed the front steps and lifted the heavy brass knocker before she could lose her nerve. The door was answered by a butler so imposing that Rosalind understood immediately why the Duke of Ashworth needed no other defences. The man was perhaps 60, silver-haired and straight-backed, with the kind of face that suggested he had seen every possible attempt to gain unauthorized entry and had found them all wanting. "Yes?" The single syllable contained multitudes of dismissal. "I need to see the Duke of Ashworth." Rosalind kept her voice steady. "I have urgent documents requiring his personal attention." The butler's gaze swept over her, her good dress that was 5 years out of fashion, her sensible boots, her complete absence of jewelry or any other marker of wealth. His expression did not change, which was somehow worse than open contempt. "His Grace is not receiving visitors. If you have documents to deliver, you may leave them with me." "I'm afraid that won't be possible. These documents must be placed directly into His Grace's hands. They concern a financial matter of some sensitivity." "Miss Thorne. Miss Rosalind Thorne. Miss Thorne." The butler's tone suggested he was committing her name to a list of persons never to be admitted. "His Grace has given explicit instructions that he is not to be disturbed. If you wish to communicate with him, you may do so through the usual channels." "I've tried the usual channels. They did not work." "Then I suggest you reconsider the urgency of your communication." They stood at an impasse. Rosalind could feel the door about to close in her face, could feel her chance slipping away. In desperation, she did something she would not have believed herself capable of. She lied with complete conviction. The documents concerned the embezzlement at Ashworth Park. She had no idea if there had been any embezzlement, but a man who managed estates as large as the Duke's must certainly have dealt with dishonest employees at some point. "I have information that cannot wait." The butler's expression flickered barely, almost imperceptibly, but Rosalind caught it. Something about Ashworth Park, something about embezzlement. She had struck a nerve. "Wait here," he said, and closed the door. Rosalind stood on the step, her heart hammering. The October air was cool, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and coal smoke. Around her, Mayfair conducted its afternoon business. Carriages passed, servants hurried on errands, a nursemaid pushed a perambulator along the square. Normal life, continuing as normal, while Rosalind stood on the brink of either triumph or catastrophe. The door opened. "Follow me," the butler said. She followed him through a marble entry hall, past paintings that probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime, up a sweeping staircase, and down a corridor lined with doors. The house was beautiful in the way of museums, impressive but not quite welcoming, as if it expected admiration rather than comfort. Rosalind filed away details automatically. The quality of the carpets, the absence of dust, the fresh flowers on a side table that must have cost a fortune this late in the year. The butler stopped before a heavy oak door and knocked twice. "Enter." The voice was deep, clipped, utterly without warmth. Rosalind straightened her spine as the butler opened the door. "A Miss Thorne to see you, Your Grace. She claims to have information about the Ashworth Park matter." "Send her in." Rosalind stepped into the study. It was smaller than she had expected, though still larger than her entire lodgings. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that showed signs of actual use rather than mere decoration. A fire burned in the grate, casting warm light across a carpet worn thin in places from pacing, she thought, not from age. And behind a large mahogany desk sat the Duke of Ashworth. He was not what she had expected. She had imagined someone older, perhaps, softer, easier to dismiss. Instead, she found a man in his early 30s with dark hair, going silver at the temples, too young for such silver, surely, unless he had earned it through trouble rather than age. His face was angular, almost severe, the kind of face that gave nothing away. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale grey, sharp as glass, currently fixed on her with an expression of cold assessment. "You're not from the estate," he said. It was not a question. "No." "And you don't have information about the embezzlement?" "No." Rosalind lifted her chin. "But something has been embezzled from me, Your Grace. My right to pay my own debts." His expression did not change, but something shifted in those grey eyes, surprise perhaps, or the beginning of recognition. "You're the woman who's been writing letters. You read them? My secretary summarized them. I assumed you would eventually tire of being refused. Then you don't know me at all." A muscle twitched in his jaw. He set down his pen and rose from behind the desk. Standing, he was taller than she had realized, broad-shouldered, in a way that made her newly aware of how alone they were, how far from propriety this interview had already strayed. "Miss Thorne?" His voice was carefully controlled. "I don't know what you imagine you've discovered, but I can assure you that I have no idea what debts you're referring to. If you've received payment from some anonymous source, I suggest you accept it gratefully and move on with your life." "You're lying." The words hung in the air between them. Rosalind saw his eyes widen fractionally, not at the accusation, she thought, but at her audacity in making it. "I beg your pardon?" "You're lying. You paid my father's debts through a trust administered by Cornelius Webb, the same trust that has paid the debts of 17 other families over the past 3 years. She took a step forward, driven by righteous fury and 3 years of exhaustion. "You thought no one would trace it back to you. You thought I would simply be grateful and silent, like all the others. But I am not a charity case, Your Grace. I don't accept handouts, and I certainly don't accept being lied to." The Duke stared at her. The firelight played across his features, casting shadows that made him look almost human, tired, surprised, something flickering beneath the mask of cold control. "How did you—" He stopped himself, pressing his lips into a thin line. "Webb told you?" "Webb confirmed nothing. I found you through the heraldic seal on your correspondence, public records of your family history, and the entirely coincidental article about your speech on banking reform. You argued against stricter. Debt collection, odd position for a wealthy duke, unless that duke knows personally what debt does to families." She paused. "You rebuilt your estate from nothing. You know exactly what I've been fighting for. And you took that fight away from me." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, stripped of some of its cold formality. "What do you want from me, Miss Thorne?" "I want to repay you. Every penny." She held up a hand to forestall his objection. "I know I can't do it immediately. The sum is $847, substantial for someone in my position. But I am a skilled bookkeeper with steady employment. I can make payments quarterly, just as I was doing to the bank. In 17 years... 17 years. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You would spend 17 years repaying a debt that has already been cleared, simply to prove a point?" "It is not about proving a point. It is about earning what I have. It is about being able to look in the mirror and know that everything I possess I obtained through my own effort." Her voice cracked slightly, and she steadied it with an effort. "You may not understand that, Your Grace. You were born with a title and an estate. But I was born with nothing less than nothing after my father died, and I have built my life brick by brick. I will not have that work undermined by someone's casual generosity." "Casual. He echoed the word, his expression unreadable. You think this was casual? I think you went to bed one night with 847 less than you had the night before, and by morning you had forgotten the loss. You know nothing of what I remember or forget. Then tell me. She met his eyes, refusing to look away. Tell me why you did it. Why me, out of all the struggling families in London? Why pay my father's debts when you didn't know me, had never met me, had no reason to care whether I lived or died? The Duke turned away. He walked to the window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. The afternoon light caught the silver at his temples, made him look older for a moment, carrying weight that had nothing to do with years. Your father's debts were called in by Whitmore and Associates, he said finally. The same bank that circled my mother like vultures after my father died. They specialize in persistent collection methods. I have an arrangement with Webb to monitor their more egregious cases. So it wasn't personal. No, he paused. Not initially. Your name came across my desk along with a dozen others. Widows, orphans, families crushed by debts they didn't deserve. I paid them all without a second thought. Another pause, longer this time. But your case was different. You were paying, slowly, painfully, but steadily. Most people in your situation would have given up years ago, taken charity where they could find it, resigned themselves to permanent debt. You didn't. Rosalind's throat tightened. You were watching me. Webb provided quarterly reports. I watched all of them. He turned back to face her. You impressed me, Miss Thorne. Your stubbornness, your refusal to accept help, your determination to stand alone. I recognized something in it, something I once felt myself. And so you decided to help me anyway, despite knowing I didn't want help, because you were going to destroy yourself proving a point. His voice sharpened. 17 years of payments, 17 years of living on nothing, sacrificing everything, working yourself to exhaustion for the privilege of saying you did it alone. I've lived that life, Miss Thorne. I would not wish it on anyone. It was my choice to make, and I made a different choice. They faced each other across the study, the fire crackling softly between them. Rosalind felt something shifting in her chest, the pure, clean anger she had carried for weeks, mixing with something more complicated. He understood. That was the worst part. He understood exactly what he had done and why she hated him for it. I still want to repay you, she said. I don't want your money. Then we are at an impasse. The Duke made a sound that might have been a laugh if he had been the kind of man who laughed. You are the most infuriating woman I have ever met. I prefer determined. So Webb told me. He regarded her for a long moment, his grey eyes unreadable. Then abruptly he returned to his desk and sat down. You're a bookkeeper, you said. For whom? Hartley and Sons? Wool merchants? Are you good? I'm exceptional. The corner of his mouth twitched. Modesty is not among your virtues, I see. I haven't the time for it. Why do you ask? He opened a drawer and withdrew a thick folder of documents, setting it on the desk between them. My estate manager at Ashworth Park was dismissed 3 weeks ago for embezzlement. He had been stealing from me for years, small amounts at first, then larger sums as he grew confident. I need someone to audit the books, to determine the full extent of the theft before I hire a replacement. Rosalind stared at him. You want to hire me? I want to offer you a trade. He met her eyes, his expression carefully neutral. You insist on repaying me. Very well. Come to Ashworth Park and review my accounts. The work will take 3 weeks, perhaps a month. When you're finished, I will consider the debt between us cleared. That's not an equal exchange. A month of work is not worth £847. It is if I say it is. He leaned back in his chair. This is not negotiable, Miss Thorne. You want to repay me, this is the only form of repayment I will accept. Take it or leave it. She should refuse. The offer was absurd, a month at a duke's estate, unchaperoned, alone with a man she barely knew. Her reputation would be destroyed. Her position at Hartley's would be lost. Every principle of propriety and self-preservation urged her to walk away. But the ledgers in that folder were calling to her. Numbers to examine, patterns to find, a puzzle to solve. And beneath that, deeper than she wanted to admit, the chance to prove herself. To show this cold, arrogant duke that she was worth more than his charity. That she could earn her freedom through skill rather than suffering. And underneath even that, in a place she refused to examine too closely, something else. Something about his grey eyes, the silver in his dark hair, the weight he carried so visibly, despite his attempts to hide it. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. "Of course you do." "I will be paid a fair wage for my work, the same as you would pay any man in such a position. That wage will be applied toward the debt. Any remaining balance at the end of the month I will continue to pay off in quarterly installments." "Agreed." "I will have my own lodgings on the estate, separate from the family quarters. My work will be treated as professional, not as—" She hesitated, searching for words, "not as a social visit." "Naturally. And you will tell no one the true nature of our arrangement. As far as anyone knows, I am a bookkeeper, hired through normal channels to review your accounts." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. "You've thought this through?" "I've had 3 years to practice thinking things through, Your Grace." She straightened her shoulders. "Do we have an agreement?" He rose from behind the desk and crossed to where she stood. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He smelled of soap and sandalwood and something else, something that made her pulse quicken, despite her best efforts at control. He extended his hand. It was not done. Men and women did not shake hands like business partners. But nothing about this meeting had been done, and Rosalind found she did not care. She took his hand. His grip was warm, firm, his palm calloused in a way that surprised her. Not the soft hand of an idle aristocrat. "We have an agreement, Miss Thorne." His voice was low, almost intimate in the quiet study. "I will send a carriage for you in 3 days." "I can arrange my own transportation." "I'm sure you can, but you won't." His eyes held hers. "Consider it the first of many battles you will have to choose not to fight." She should have had a retort for that, something sharp and clever, something to remind him that she was not a woman who could be managed or directed. But standing this close to him, her hand still in his, she found that words had abandoned her. 3 days, she said instead. 3 days. She withdrew her hand slowly, too slowly, and turned toward the door. She could feel his gaze on her back as she walked, could feel the weight of what she had just agreed to settling onto her shoulders. At the door, she paused. "Your Grace." "Miss Thorne." "For what it's worth." She didn't turn around. "I still don't accept charity. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." "I wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise." She left, without looking back. Down the corridor, down the sweeping stairs, past the butler who watched her with an expression of profound disapproval. Through the marble entry hall and out into the grey October afternoon, where the world continued on its ordinary way, completely unaware that Rosalind Thorne had just made the most reckless decision of her life. As she walked away from Ashworth House, she told herself that the flutter in her chest was merely anxiety. The shakiness in her hands was merely relief that the confrontation was over. The persistent awareness of his grey eyes, his warm grip, the unexpected understanding in his voice, that was nothing at all. She had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to explain to Hartley's why she needed an extended leave. 3 days to arrange for Timothy's care in her absence. 3 days to convince herself that this was purely a matter of business, of repaying a debt, of restoring her independence. 3 days to forget the way Sebastian Cole, Duke of Ashworth, had looked at her when she called him a liar, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find. The carriage arrived precisely at 10 o'clock on the appointed day, not a minute before, not a minute after. Rosalind, who had been ready since dawn because she was absolutely not nervous, watched through the window of her lodgings as it rolled to a stop. It was an elegant vehicle, well-maintained but not ostentatious, drawn by a matched pair of grey horses. The driver was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and the patient expression of someone accustomed to waiting. There was no sign of the Duke himself. She was not disappointed. She had not expected him to come. Timothy helped her carry her trunk down the stairs. Her brother was 17, gangly in the way of young men who had not yet grown into their height, with their mother's brown hair and their father's perpetual optimism. He had taken the news of her departure with surprising equanimity, asking only a few questions about the nature of the position and seeming satisfied with her careful half-truths. "You're certain you'll be all right?" Rosalind asked for the 3rd time as the driver loaded her trunk. "Mrs. Pemberton has agreed to look in on you, and there's money for food and coal in the desk drawer." "I'll be fine, Rosie." Timothy grinned at her, the same grin their father had worn when embarking on yet another doomed venture. On Timothy, it was endearing rather than alarming. "I'm not a child anymore. I can manage for a few weeks." "I know you can. She stopped, swallowing the familiar anxiety. Timothy was not their father. He had inherited the optimism without the recklessness, the charm without the irresponsibility. He was going to be fine. She was the one embarking on something reckless. "Write to me," she said instead. "Every week. And if anything goes wrong, anything at all, send word immediately and I'll come home." "Nothing is going to go wrong." He pulled her into a brief, tight hug. "Go audit your Duke's books, Rosie. Show him what you can do." "Your Duke." The words lingered as the carriage pulled away from the curb, as London's familiar streets gave way to the countryside, as the hours passed in a blur of October landscapes and her own racing thoughts. The Duke of Ashworth was not hers. He was her employer. No, not even that. He was a man to whom she owed a debt, and she was working to repay it. That was the sum total of their relationship. Whatever had passed between them in his study, the understanding, the unexpected connection, the way he had looked at her, it was nothing. It meant nothing. She repeated this to herself as the carriage travelled north, as the gentle fields of Hertfordshire gave way to the rolling hills of Leicestershire. She repeated it as they stopped to change horses, as the autumn light faded to dusk and then to darkness. She repeated it the next morning as they crossed into Derbyshire, as the landscape grew wilder and more beautiful, as the peaks rose against the grey October sky. She was still repeating it when the carriage crested a hill and Ashworth Park came into view. The estate sprawled across the valley below like something from a dream. The house itself was Georgian, built of honey-coloured stone that glowed even under the clouded sky, its proportions elegant and its scale intimidating. But it was the grounds that caught her breath, acres of parkland rolling down to a lake, ancient trees standing sentinel along the drive, gardens visible in the distance that must be magnificent in summer. This was what the Duke of Ashworth had nearly lost. This was what he had saved. She understood suddenly why he carried so much weight on his shoulders. The carriage descended the hill and passed through wrought-iron gates, then swept up a long drive lined with oaks. As they approached the house, The front door opened and a woman emerged, not a servant, judging by her dress, but someone who belonged here. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair arranged in a fashionable style and a warm smile that immediately put Rosalind at ease. "You must be Miss Thorne." The woman hurried forward as Rosalind stepped down from the carriage. "I'm Marguerite Sebastian's sister. He wrote that you were coming to help with the estate accounts. I'm so glad you're here. It's been chaos since Mr. Blackwell left." Left was a polite way to describe dismissal for embezzlement, but Rosalind appreciated the discretion. "Lady Marguerite, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Oh, please, just Marguerite. We don't stand on ceremony here, whatever Sebastian might prefer." She linked her arm through Rosalind's as if they were old friends. "Come inside. You must be exhausted from the journey. I've had a room prepared in the east wing. It has the nicest light in the morning, and it's close to the study where you'll be working." Rosalind allowed herself to be swept into the house, Marguerite chattering comfortably about the weather and the journey and the improvements she hoped to make to the gardens next spring. The interior of Ashworth Park was warmer than she had expected, not the cold museum quality of the London townhouse, but something that felt almost like a home. Fresh flowers on side tables, a child's drawing pinned to a door frame, the sound of high-pitched laughter echoing from somewhere upstairs. "That will be Edmund and Clara," Marguerite said, following her gaze. "My children. 8 and 5, and absolutely wild, I'm afraid. They'll be desperate to meet you. We don't get many visitors. But I've told them they must give you time to settle in before they pounce." "I look forward to meeting them." Rosalind hesitated. "The Duke mentioned that you live here at the estate." Something flickered across Marguerite's face. Grief, quickly controlled. "My husband passed away 2 years ago. Sebastian insisted we come to live at Ashworth Park. He said it was because the children needed country air, but really—" She smiled, a little sadly. "He was worried about me. He worries about everyone, you know, though he'd never admit it." This did not match Rosalind's image of the cold, controlled Duke she had met in London. She filed the information away. Another piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. Her room was large and comfortable, with tall windows overlooking the east gardens and a fire already burning in the grate. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the dresser, late roses, their scent filling the room with unexpected sweetness. Rosalind stood at the window for a long moment after Marguerite left, watching the shadows lengthen across the parkland. She was here. She had actually done it. Left her job, left her brother, left everything familiar behind to work for a duke she barely knew. The recklessness of it struck her fully for the first time. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Thorne?" A maid's voice. "His Grace requests your presence in the study. If you're not too tired from your journey, that is." Rosalind smoothed her dress and checked her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired. She was tired, but more than that, she looked determined. Good. She would need that determination. "Tell His Grace I'll be there directly." The study at Ashworth Park was larger than the one in London, but it had the same atmosphere of intense use. Papers covered the desk, books were stacked on every available surface, and the fire had burned down to embers, as if its tender had been too absorbed in work to notice. The Duke stood by the window, silhouetted against the grey afternoon light. He turned as she entered, and Rosalind felt the same jolt she had felt in London, that disconcerting awareness of his presence, the way his grey eyes seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "Miss Thorne, I trust your journey was comfortable?" "It was, thank you." She clasped her hands in front of her, maintaining the professional distance she had promised herself. "I'm ready to begin work whenever you wish. Tomorrow will be soon enough. Today you should rest. Familiarize yourself with the house." He moved to the desk and picked up a thick folder. "But I wanted to give you this. The accounts for the past 3 years, what we've been able to reconstruct at least. Blackwell was—" thorough in covering his tracks. Rosalind took the folder. It was heavier than she expected, stuffed with papers in no apparent order. Her fingers itched to sort through them, to begin imposing structure on the chaos. "May I ask a question, Your Grace?" "You may ask. I don't guarantee an answer." "How did you discover the embezzlement?" Something shifted in his expression. "I didn't. My sister did. She noticed that some of the household accounts didn't match what she knew we were spending. When she brought it to my attention, He paused. I realized I had been trusting too much and verifying too little. An easy mistake to make when you're managing multiple properties and investments. An inexcusable mistake for a man who built his fortune on attention to detail." His voice was harsh, but the harshness was directed inward. "I was careless, Miss Thorne. Blackwell had been with the family for 20 years. I assumed his loyalty, and I was wrong. I won't make that error again." Rosalind understood suddenly why he had agreed so readily to her proposal. It wasn't just about giving her a way to repay her debt. It was about bringing in someone new, someone with no history here, someone who would look at the numbers without sentiment or assumption. "I'll find where the money went," she said, "and I'll make certain it's documented thoroughly enough to pursue legal action if you wish." "Legal action would mean public scandal. The newspapers would delight in the story the cold Duke of Ashworth cheated by a trusted servant." His mouth twisted. "I care more about understanding the scope of the theft than pursuing punishment." "Then you'll understand it. I promise you that." He held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing through his grey eyes. Then he nodded once, a sharp gesture of dismissal. "Dinner is at 7. Marguerite will be disappointed if you don't join us. She's been desperate for company since we came back from London, and the children—" A faint softening around his eyes. "The children have been told to leave you in peace, but I make no promises about their obedience." "I look forward to meeting them." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Miss Thorne? Your Grace?" "For what it's worth." He paused, and for a moment he looked almost uncertain. This man who seemed uncertainty's opposite. "I'm glad you came, despite the circumstances." She didn't know how to respond to that. The honest answer that she was glad too, that something about this place already felt different from what she had expected, was too revealing, too dangerous. "I'm glad for the opportunity to repay my debt," she said, instead. "Nothing more." She left before he could respond, the folder of accounts clutched against her chest like armor. Behind her, she heard him let out a breath, frustration perhaps, or something else she couldn't name. It didn't matter. They had an agreement. She would do the work, repay her debt, and leave. Whatever complications existed, whatever she had seen in his eyes, whatever she was beginning to feel in her own chest, they were irrelevant. This was business, nothing more. She almost believed it. Dinner that evening was nothing like Rosalind had expected. She had braced herself for formality, for the stiff silences and careful conversation of aristocratic dining. Instead, she found herself seated at a table with 2 children who chattered constantly, a hostess who laughed at their antics, and a duke who smiled. Not often, and not broadly. But when little Clara climbed into his lap, demanding to show him a drawing she had made, his face transformed. The coldness melted away, replaced by something warm and patient and utterly unexpected. He examined the drawing, a lopsided horse, apparently with grave attention, asked several serious questions about its breed and temperament, and declared it the finest horse portrait he had ever seen. "Uncle Sebastian is very particular about horses," Edmund informed Rosalind solemnly. "He says ours are the best in Derbyshire." "The best in England," Clara corrected. "He said so last week." "I may have exaggerated," the Duke admitted, catching Rosalind's eye. There was humour in his gaze, rueful and self-aware. "Pride is a terrible sin, children. Don't follow my example." "You're not terrible," Clara said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You're the best uncle in England, in the whole world." Something twisted in Rosalind's chest. She looked away, focusing on her plate, on the excellent food she was barely tasting. This was not the cold, unapproachable Duke she had confronted in London. This was something else entirely. A man with a family who loved him, with children who climbed on him without fear, with a sister who teased him about his early grey hair and his inability to relax. This was a man she could like, a man she could come to care about. The thought was terrifying. After dinner, Marguerite took the children up to bed, leaving Rosalind alone with the Duke in the drawing-room. He offered her sherry. She accepted, though she rarely drank. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but charged with something she couldn't name. "Your sister is very kind," she said finally. "She is. Kinder than I deserve, certainly." He stood by the fireplace, the flames casting shadows across his angular face. "She insisted on coming to London when she heard I was hiring an auditor. She wanted to meet you." "Did she approve?" "She did. She said you had—" He hesitated. "Spirit. Apparently that's something she values." "And you? Do you value spirit?" The question was more provocative than she had intended. His eyes met hers across the room, and for a moment the air between them seemed to thicken. "I find myself uncertain what I value, Miss Thorne. Until recently, I would have said efficiency and precision and results that could be measured. But lately—" He stopped, shook his head. "Forgive me. It's been a long day, and I'm not making sense." "You're making perfect sense." She set down her sherry glass and rose. "You're saying that you've spent so long protecting yourself from caring about anything that you've forgotten what it feels like to care. And now something is making you remember, and you don't know whether to be grateful or afraid." He stared at her. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 9. "How do you know that?" "Because I feel the same way." The words came out before she could stop them, more honest than she had meant to be. "I've spent 3 years caring about nothing but survival. And now I'm here, in this beautiful house with your kind sister and your lovely niece and nephew. And you're not at all what I expected. And I don't—" She caught herself, took a breath. "I don't know what to do with any of it." He moved toward her, and for a wild moment she thought he might touch her, but he stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his grey eyes. "What did you expect? Someone cold, distant, easy to dismiss?" She managed a small smile. "You were supposed to be a villain, Your Grace. That would have made everything much simpler. I could try to be more villainous, if it would help. I suspect it's too late for that." She took a step back, putting safer distance between them. "I should retire. Tomorrow I begin work, and I want to be fresh." "Of course." He inclined his head, formal once more. "Good night, Miss Thorne." "Good night, Your Grace." She left the drawing-room with her heart pounding and her mind in chaos. The corridor stretched before her, firelight flickering from sconces along the walls. The house settling into nighttime quiet around her. She was in trouble. She had known it from the moment she stepped into his London study and felt that first jolt of awareness. She had known it and come anyway, telling herself that business was business, that she could keep her heart out of it, that he was nothing to her but a debt to be repaid. She had been lying to herself. Tomorrow she would begin working. She would bury herself in ledgers and accounts and the safe precision of numbers. She would find where the money had gone and document it and prove her worth. And she would not allow herself to fall for a duke who was everything she had never known she wanted. She repeated this promise as she climbed the stairs to her room. She repeated it as she prepared for bed. She repeated it as she lay in the unfamiliar darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the country estate settling around her. But when she finally slept, she dreamed of grey eyes and silver-touched hair, and a smile she had never expected to see. The study became her sanctuary. Rosalind established herself there the morning after her arrival, spreading Blackwell's chaotic records across the massive desk until every surface was covered with papers, sorted by date, by category, by the particular flavor of deception they represented. The morning light streamed through tall windows as she worked, and she found herself grateful for the complexity of the task. Numbers did not confuse her. Numbers did not make her feel things she had no business feeling. By the end of her first week, she had identified 3 separate methods Blackwell had used to siphon funds from the estate. The first was simple inflation of supplier invoices, paying £10 for goods that cost 7 and pocketing the difference. The second was more sophisticated. Ghost workers on the estate payroll. Names that appeared in the ledgers but belonged to no living person. The third was the most audacious a series of fictional repairs to tenant cottages, complete with forged receipts from craftsmen who did not exist. He was clever, she admitted to Sebastian over dinner one evening. She had stopped thinking of him as the Duke somewhere around the 3rd day, though she was careful never to use his Christian name aloud. The individual amounts were small enough not to raise suspicion. It's only when you look at the pattern over years that the scope becomes clear. And what is the scope? His voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his jaw. At minimum, £4,000 over the past 5 years. Possibly more. I'm still working through the earlier records. Marguerite drew in a sharp breath. £4,000? Sebastian, that's significant. His grey eyes met Rosalind's across the table. But not ruinous. The estate can absorb the loss. The estate shouldn't have to absorb anything. Rosalind set down her fork, her appetite gone. This was theft, pure and simple. The money belongs to you. And pursuing it would mean legal proceedings that could drag on for years, publicizing the family's private affairs for the entertainment of the newspapers. He shook his head. I've already dismissed Blackwell without reference. He'll find it difficult to secure another position of trust. For now, that will have to be enough. She wanted to argue. Every instinct she had screamed that injustice should not go unpunished, that a man who had stolen from a family that trusted him deserved worse than quiet unemployment. But she saw the weariness in Sebastian's face, the weight of responsibilities that extended far beyond a single dishonest employee, and she held her tongue. There's something else, she said instead. Some of the discrepancies don't match Blackwell's patterns. The supplier inflation, the ghost workers, those all have his signature. But there are other irregularities that feel different, smaller, more recent, centered on the household accounts rather than the estate. Sebastian's eyes sharpened. You think he had help? I think someone else has been stealing, someone who's still here. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Marguerite's hand had gone to her throat. Edmund and Clara, mercifully, had already been excused to the nursery and missed the revelation. I'll need access to the household records, Rosalind continued. Staff wages, domestic purchases, anything that passes through the housekeeper's accounts, and I'll need to be discreet about it. If there is an accomplice, we don't want them alerted. Whatever you need. Sebastian's voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. Find out who it is. She nodded, already planning her approach. More numbers to analyze, more patterns to trace. Safe, comprehensible work that kept her mind occupied and her heart at a distance. It was getting harder to maintain that distance. The days fell into a rhythm. Rosalind rose early, took breakfast in her room to maximize working hours, and spent the mornings buried in accounts. Afternoons she used for interviews, carefully casual conversations with staff members, gathering information about household routines and purchasing patterns without revealing her true purpose. Evenings she spent with the family, drawn into their warmth despite her best intentions. It was the evenings that undid her. Sebastian, she discovered, was a different man within the walls of Ashworth Park. The cold formality he wore in London fell away piece by piece, replaced by something more human. He played chess with Edmund, patiently teaching the boy strategy even when he made the same mistakes repeatedly. He read stories to Clara, giving each character a different voice, until the little girl collapsed into giggles. He debated poetry with Marguerite, defending Wordsworth against her preference for Byron with an intensity that suggested genuine passion beneath his controlled exterior. And he watched Rosalind. She felt his gaze on her constantly during dinner conversations, during the quiet hours after the children went to bed, during the moments when she looked up from her work to find him standing in the study doorway with some pretense of needing a book or checking her progress. He never approached her inappropriately, never said anything that crossed the line of employer and employee, but his eyes followed her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. She should have been uncomfortable. Instead, she found herself seeking excuses to be near him, lingering after dinner, accepting his offers to walk in the gardens when she needed a break from the ledgers. They talked about everything and nothing, her childhood in London, his years at Oxford before his father's death forced him home, the books they had both read, and the ideas they had both cherished. He listened to her opinions as if they mattered, challenged her thinking without dismissing it, treated her as an intellectual equal in a way no man ever had. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. "You're falling for him," Marguerite said one afternoon, appearing in the study doorway with a cup of tea Rosalind had not asked for. Rosalind's pen slipped, leaving an ugly blot on the page she was working. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you do." Marguerite set the tea on the desk and settled into the chair across from her, arranging her skirts with the ease of a woman who had all the time in the world. "I've watched you at dinner, the way you light up when he enters the room. I've watched him too. He hasn't been this animated in years, possibly ever. We have a professional arrangement. I'm here to audit the accounts, nothing more." "And when the accounts are audited, what then?" Rosalind stared at the numbers on the page before her, suddenly unable to focus. "Then I return to London, to my position, my life, my brother, to your independence." Marguerite's voice was gentle. "Sebastian told me about the debt, you know, about how you tracked him down and demanded to repay him. He said you were the most stubborn woman he had ever met." "I prefer determined." "So he mentioned." A smile played at the corners of Marguerite's mouth. "He also said you were the most extraordinary woman he had ever met, though I don't think he realized he was saying it." Rosalind's heart stuttered. "He didn't, not in those words, but I know my brother, Miss Thorne. He has spent 15 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that he is better off alone, that caring for anyone is a weakness he cannot afford. And then you stormed into his study and demanded to be treated as an equal, and suddenly those walls don't seem quite so sturdy." "Even if that were true," Rosalind's voice caught, and she had to steady it before continuing. "Even if that were true, nothing could come of it. He is a duke. I am a merchant's daughter with a scandalous occupation and no fortune to speak of. Society would never accept. Society can go hang." Marguerite leaned forward, her expression fierce. "Sebastian has spent his entire adult life doing what society expected. He saved the estate, rebuilt the fortune, became the perfect cold duke that everyone wanted him to be. And he is miserable. He has been miserable for years, and he didn't even know it until you showed up and reminded him what it felt like to be alive. You cannot know that. I am his sister. I know him better than anyone. Marguerite reached across the desk and took Rosalind's hand. He needs someone who sees him, truly sees him, not the title, not the fortune, not the reputation. Someone who will argue with him and challenge him and refuse to be intimidated by his coldness. Someone exactly like you. Rosalind pulled her hand away, shaking her head. Even if I wanted, and I am not saying I do, I have spent 3 years building my independence. I will not give that up to become anyone's charity case, not even a... Dukes! Who said anything about charity? Marguerite's eyes sparkled. I'm talking about partnership. That's what you demanded from him, isn't it? An equal exchange? What if you could have that in everything, not just in business? The question hung in the air between them, impossible and tantalizing. Rosalind thought of Sebastian's grey eyes watching her across the dinner table, of his rare smiles that she had come to treasure, of the conversations that left her feeling more understood than she had ever felt in her life. What if she could have that forever? The thought was too dangerous to examine closely. She pushed it away, reaching for the safety of her ledgers. I need to finish these accounts, she said, if you'll excuse me. Marguerite rose, but paused at the door. Just think about it, Miss Thorne. That's all I ask. Think about what you actually want, not what you think you should want. She left, and Rosalind stared at the numbers on the page before her until they blurred into meaninglessness. What did she want? She had spent so long wanting only survival, only independence, only the satisfaction of knowing she owed nothing to anyone. Those goals had been clear, comprehensible, achievable through sheer force of will. But now there was Sebastian. Sebastian, who understood her in ways she had never expected. Sebastian, who looked at her as if she was something precious and rare. Sebastian, who made her want things she had never allowed herself to want. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be valued. She wanted to stop fighting so hard and let someone carry part of the weight. She wanted him. The admission, even in the privacy of her own mind, felt like stepping off a cliff. That evening, Clara fell ill. It began with a cough at dinner, a slight flush to the little girl's cheeks that Marguerite dismissed as excitement from the afternoon's play. But by nightfall, the cough had deepened into something harsher, and Clara's skin was hot to the touch. Rosalind was in the study, working late, as had become her habit, when she heard the commotion, hurrying footsteps in the corridor above. Marguerite's voice raised in concern, and then Sebastian's deeper tones giving orders. She set down her pen and went to investigate, drawn by instinct toward whatever crisis was unfolding. She found them in the nursery, Clara lying listless in her bed, while Marguerite pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. Sebastian stood by the window, his face ashen in the candlelight. "The doctor has been sent for," Marguerite said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "But it will be hours before he arrives. The village is 5 miles distant, and the roads are poor at night." "What can I do?" Rosalind asked. Sebastian turned to look at her, and she saw something she had never expected to see on his face. Terror. Raw, unconcealed terror that stripped away every layer of control he usually wore. "Frederick died like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marguerite's husband. A fever that seemed like nothing, and then—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "This is not the same," Marguerite said firmly, though her hands trembled as she adjusted Clara's blankets. "Frederick was already weakened from consumption. Clara is strong, healthy. She's so small." Sebastian's voice cracked. "She's so small. And if something happens to her—" Rosalind moved without thinking. She crossed the room and took his hand, gripping it firmly until his wild eyes focused on her face. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "Panic will not help her. We need to stay calm, keep her comfortable, and wait for the doctor. Can you do that?" He stared at her as if she were a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Good." She squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "Marguerite, what do you need?" The next hours passed in a blur of activity. They brought basin after basin of cool water to sponge Clara's burning skin. They coaxed sips of water between her cracked lips when she roused enough to swallow. They took turns sitting by her bedside, talking to her softly, singing lullabies that Marguerite remembered from their own childhood. Sebastian refused to leave the room. He sat in a chair by Clara's bed, watching her every breath with an intensity that made Rosalind's heart ache. This was not the cold duke that society whispered about. This was a man who loved his niece with a ferocity that left no room for pretense or control. Sometime after midnight, Marguerite's exhaustion caught up with her. Her eyes were closing despite her best efforts to stay awake, and Rosalind gently guided her to the small couch in the corner of the nursery. "Rest for a little while," she said. "I'll watch Clara. I'll wake you if anything changes." "You should rest too." Marguerite's voice was thick with fatigue. "You've been working since dawn. I'm not tired." It was a lie, but a necessary one. "Sleep, Marguerite. Your daughter will need you strong when she wakes." Marguerite's eyes fluttered closed, and within moments her breathing had deepened into sleep. Rosalind turned back to find Sebastian watching her, something unreadable in his grey eyes. "You should rest too," she told him. "I can keep watch alone." "I can't." He shook his head, his gaze returning to Clara's flushed face. "Every time I close my eyes, I see—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "Tell me." She pulled a chair close to his and sat down. "What do you see?" For a long moment he was silent. When he spoke, his voice was rough, stripped of all pretense. "I see my mother. After my father died, after the creditors came, after she realized what he had left us, she didn't eat for 3 days. She barely spoke. I was 17 years old, and I had to force food into her mouth like a child, because she had simply stopped." "Sebastian." His Christian name slipped out without thought, and she saw his eyes widen at the intimacy of it. But she didn't take it back. She recovered, eventually. Physically, at least. But something in her was broken. She lived for another 8 years, but she was never really present again, never really alive. He turned to look at Rosalind, and she saw the boy he had been beneath the man he had become frightened, lonely, carrying a weight no 17-year-old should have to bear. "I swore I would never be that vulnerable, never let anyone matter enough to break me the way she was broken, and for 15 years I succeeded." What changed? His gaze held hers, intense and searching. "You happened." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning she wasn't ready to examine. Before she could respond, Clara stirred on the bed, whimpering softly. The moment shattered. Sebastian leaned forward, all his attention on his niece, and Rosalind busied herself with refreshing the damp cloth on Clara's forehead. But something had shifted between them. Some wall had fallen that could not be rebuilt. They passed the rest of the night in near silence, watching Clara's chest rise and fall, marking each breath like a prayer. And somewhere in the darkest hours, when exhaustion began to blur the edges of reality, Rosalind felt Sebastian's hand find hers. His fingers intertwined with hers and held on, drawing strength from her presence, offering connection in return. She did not pull away. Dawn was beginning to lighten the windows when Clara's fever finally broke. One moment her skin was burning, the next it was slick with cool sweat, her breathing easier, her color improving with every passing minute. By the time the doctor arrived, delayed by a fallen tree on the road, there was little for him to do but confirm what they already knew. The crisis had passed. Marguerite woke to find her daughter sleeping peacefully and burst into tears of relief. Sebastian stayed long enough to assure himself that Clara was truly out of danger, then excused himself with a muttered word about needing air. Rosalind watched him go, saw the way his shoulders shook as he walked away, and knew he was finally allowing himself to feel the terror he had been holding at bay all night. She gave him 20 minutes. Then she went to find him. He was in the garden, standing beneath an ancient oak, with his back to the house. The early morning light caught the silver at his temples, and she thought again how young he must have been when that silver appeared. How many crises, how many sleepless nights, how many burdens borne alone. "She's going to be fine," Rosalind said softly, coming to stand beside him. "I know." His voice was hoarse. "I know. I just—" He broke off, pressing the heel of his hand against his eyes. "I couldn't bear to lose her, any of them. And the fear of it, the constant fear." He shook his head. "This is why I didn't want to care about anyone. Caring makes you weak. Caring makes you human." She stepped closer, close enough to touch him if she dared. "The alternative is what you described last night, walls so high, that nothing can reach you, but nothing good can reach you either. No love, no connection, no infuriating women who track me down and demand to repay debts I wanted to give as gifts." A surprised laugh escaped her. "No, none of those either." He turned to look at her, and her breath caught at the rawness in his expression. This was Sebastian without armor, Sebastian stripped down to his essential self, and he was beautiful in his vulnerability. "I meant what I said last night," he murmured. "You changed something in me. I don't know how or why, but from the moment you walked into my study and called me a liar, I couldn't get you out of my head." "Sebastian, I know." He held up a hand, forestalling whatever objection she might make. "I know you came here for work, to repay a debt you never asked for. I know you value your independence above everything else, and I know I have no right to—" She kissed him. It was impulsive, reckless, everything she had spent her adult life training herself not to be. But his lips were warm and soft, and he made a sound of surprise that shifted into something else, something hungry and tender at once. His hands came up to cradle her face, gentle despite their strength, and she melted into him as if this was what she had been waiting for her entire life. The kiss deepened. She felt his heartbeat against her palm where she had pressed her hand to his chest. She felt her own heart answering, racing, full to bursting with emotions she had refused to name until this moment. Then sense returned, and she pulled back. "I shouldn't have—" She shook her head, stepping away from him. "I'm sorry." "Don't." He caught her hand before she could retreat further. "Don't apologize for the first genuine thing that's happened to me in 15 years. It can't happen again." Her voice was steady, though her heart was anything but. "I can't be your distraction, your temporary amusement. I have too much to lose." "You think that's what this is? A distraction?" Something flashed in his grey eyes, hurt, anger, determination. "Rosalind, I have spent 15 years avoiding exactly this situation. I could have had a dozen distractions, 100 amusements. I didn't want them. I want you. You don't know me. I know that you tracked me across London because your pride wouldn't let you accept a gift. I know that you work harder than anyone I've ever met, that you see patterns in numbers the way some people see shapes in clouds. I know that you stayed up all night with my niece because you couldn't bear to leave her, that you held my hand in the dark when I was falling apart." He stepped closer, closing the distance she had tried to create. "I know that you are the most stubborn, infuriating, extraordinary woman I have ever met, and I am so terrified of losing you that I can barely breathe." Tears pricked at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, refusing to cry, refusing to let him see how deeply his words had struck. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to let someone in." "Neither do I." His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. "But I want to learn. With you. If you'll let me." She should refuse. She should retreat to the safety of her ledgers, her numbers, her carefully constructed independence. She should protect herself the way she had always protected herself, by needing no one and expecting nothing. But she looked into Sebastian's grey eyes and saw her own fear reflected there, her own longing, her own desperate hope for something more than survival. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "That makes two of us." This time when he kissed her, she didn't pull away. The next week passed in a strange new landscape. Rosalind continued her work on the accounts, but everything around her had shifted. Sebastian's gaze across the dinner table now carried an intimacy that made her flush. Stolen moments in the garden became precious islands of connection in the busy days. Marguerite noticed everything, of course, but kept her observations to herself, merely smiling with satisfaction whenever she caught them looking at each other. They were careful. Rosalind refused to compromise her professional position, refused to become merely the Duke's romantic interest, rather than the skilled auditor who was untangling years of deception. And Sebastian respected that boundary, even as he found creative ways to blur its edges, leaving books she might enjoy on her desk, appearing with tea just when she needed a break, engaging her in conversations that ranged from philosophy to politics to the particular challenges of managing a large estate. "I could use someone with your skills permanently," he said one afternoon, standing in the study doorway as she worked. "Not just for this audit. The estate needs proper management systems, proper oversight, someone who sees what I miss." "Are you offering me a position?" She looked up from her papers, one eyebrow raised. "I'm offering you a partnership." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I want you to stay, Rosalind. Not because I'm paying you, not because you owe me anything, because you belong here. I don't know if I can—" "I know." He held up a hand. "I know you need time. I know you need to finish what you started, prove whatever you need to prove to yourself. I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm just—" He paused, searching for words. "I'm telling you what I want. For the first time in 15 years, I'm saying out loud what I actually want instead of what I think I should want." She stared at him, this man who had spent his life constructing walls and was now systematically dismantling them, for her, because of her. "What do you want?" she asked softly. "You." Simple, direct, terrifying. "I want to wake up knowing you're in the next room. I want to argue with you about accounting methods and discuss books and watch you lose your temper when the numbers don't balance. I want to grow old with someone who sees me, really sees me, and isn't afraid of what she finds." "Sebastian." A knock at the door interrupted her. Sebastian's jaw tightened with frustration as he stepped back, recomposing his expression into something more neutral. "Enter." The butler appeared, his weathered face troubled. "Your Grace, there's been a letter for Miss Thorne." "Urgent," the messenger said. Rosalind's heart seized. Only one person would send her urgent correspondence. Timothy. She took the letter with trembling hands and broke the seal. The words swam before her eyes, but certain phrases jumped out in sharp relief. Arrested. Debtor's prison. Called in the loan. £300. "No." The word came out strangled, desperate. "No, this can't—" "Rosalind?" Sebastian was beside her instantly, his hand on her arm. "What is it? What's happened?" "My brother." She could barely force the words out. "Someone called in an old debt, a loan my father guaranteed years ago. Timothy has been arrested. He's in debtor's prison. The room seemed to tilt around her. £300. An impossible sum. She had nothing, no savings, no assets to sell. She had given everything to paying her father's debts, and now, I can pay it. Sebastian's voice cut through her panic. I'll send funds immediately. Have him released within the day. No. The word came out sharp, instinctive. Even now, even facing disaster, she couldn't accept charity. She couldn't owe him more than she already did. Rosalind, this is not the time for pride. I said no. She pulled away from him, her mind racing. I need to go to London. I need to find out what happened. Who called in the debt? How? She stopped. Something cold settled into her stomach as connections formed in her mind. The timing, the amount, the particular cruelty of it. The accomplice, she said slowly. Whoever has been stealing from the household accounts, they must have found out about my investigation. This is retaliation. Sebastian's expression hardened. You think someone here arranged this? I think someone here has connections to Blackwell, and Blackwell has every reason to want me discredited or gone. She pressed her hand to her forehead, trying to think through the panic. If they can force me to leave, if they can make it seem like I've abandoned my position, then they can cover their tracks before you find them. Sebastian's voice was grim, and I would never know the full extent of the theft. I have to go. She moved toward the door, already calculating how quickly she could pack, how soon she could reach London. I have to help Timothy. You can't do this alone. Sebastian caught her arm, his grip firm but gentle. Let me help you. Not with money. I understand that you won't accept that. But with information, with connections. I know people in London who can find out who called in this debt and why. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to refuse help, to handle this herself as she had handled everything for the past 3 years. But Timothy was in prison. Timothy, who had done nothing wrong except be related to a dead man who had made too many promises. Timothy, who was brilliant and hopeful and everything she had worked so hard to protect. What kind of help? She asked. My solicitor can make inquiries. Find out who holds this debt, what their connection might be to Blackwell. His grey eyes held hers, steady and serious. I'm not offering charity, Rosalind. I'm offering partnership, the kind you demanded from me the first day we met. An equal exchange. That was what she had wanted, what she had insisted upon. And now Sebastian was offering it again, not salvation, not rescue, but collaboration. She took a breath. All right. His shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he had been braced for her refusal. I'll send word to London immediately. We can be on the road within the hour. We? You didn't think I would let you face this alone? Something fierce flickered in his expression. Someone has targeted the woman I... He stopped, the words hanging unfinished between them. Someone has targeted my auditor, my guest. I have every right to investigate. She knew what he had almost said. The woman I love, the words he wasn't ready to speak, or perhaps that he thought she wasn't ready to hear. He wasn't wrong. She wasn't ready. Not for declarations, not for promises, not for the weight of his feelings on top of everything else. But he was coming with her anyway, not because she needed rescuing, but because he refused to let her fight alone. It was exactly what she would have done in his place. 1 hour, she said. I need to pack and leave instructions for the work I've completed so far. I'll have the carriage prepared. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Rosalind, we're going to fix this. Whatever it takes. She nodded, not trusting her voice. And as he disappeared down the corridor, she allowed herself one moment of weakness, one moment to press her hand against her heart and feel the fear and gratitude and something else that tangled together there. Then she straightened her spine and began to prepare. She had a brother to save, a conspiracy to unravel, and impossible as it seemed, a duke who loved her. One thing at a time. The carriage ride to London was the longest of Rosalind's life. They travelled through the night, stopping only to change horses, Sebastian sitting across from her in the darkness with an expression of grim determination. He had sent a rider ahead with messages to his solicitor, to contacts in the legal world, to anyone who might help them trace the origins of this sudden debt. Rosalind clutched Timothy's letter in her hands, reading and rereading it until she had memorized every word. Her brother's fear leaked through his attempt at calm. "I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. Please don't worry. I know you'll sort this out." He believed in her. He had always believed in her, trusted her to fix whatever went wrong. And now he was sitting in a debtor's prison, surrounded by criminals and the desperate poor, because she hadn't been able to protect him. "Stop!" Sebastian's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Whatever you're telling yourself right now, stop. You don't know what I'm telling myself. I know that look. I've worn it myself countless times." He leaned forward, his grey eyes catching the moonlight that filtered through the carriage window. "You're blaming yourself, telling yourself that if you had been smarter, faster, more careful, this wouldn't have happened. If I had been more careful, I might have found the accomplice before they could retaliate. And if I had been more careful, I would have discovered Blackwell's theft years ago." His voice was gentle, but firm. "We cannot predict every enemy, Rosalind. We can only respond when they strike. This is different. Timothy is my responsibility. As this estate was mine, as Marguerite and the children are mine." He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Do you blame me for Blackwell's theft?" "Of course not. He deceived you." "Then why do you blame yourself for someone else's deliberate cruelty?" She had no answer. The logic was sound, but logic had never been particularly effective against guilt. "Tell me about Timothy," Sebastian said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Not about the debt. About him." The question surprised her into actually thinking about it. "He's brilliant. Far cleverer than I am, though he doesn't believe it. He wanted to study law, and he was working as a clerk for a solicitor, saving money for his articles when this happened." Her voice softened. "He has our father's optimism without any of his foolishness. He actually thinks about consequences, plans for the future. He's going to be someone important someday." "He sounds remarkable." "He is. He's the best thing in my life." She paused, realizing what she had said and who she had said it to. "I mean, I understand." Sebastian's expression was unreadable. "Family comes first. It should." Was there hurt in his voice? Disappointment? Rosalind studied his face in the dim light, searching for clues. "He's the only family I have left," she said quietly. "For years, he was the only person I could trust, the only person I was fighting for. Learning to trust anyone else." She shook her head. "It doesn't come naturally." "I know." His grip on her hand tightened briefly. "Believe me, I know." They sat in silence as the carriage rolled through the darkness. Two people who had spent their lives building walls, now struggling to find doors through them. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted, some last barrier crumbling, some final fear releasing its hold. When Rosalind finally fell into an exhausted sleep, her head resting against the carriage wall, Sebastian covered her with his coat and watched over her until dawn. London appeared on the horizon as grey light began to filter through the clouds. Rosalind woke to the sound of city traffic vendors calling their wares, carriage wheels clattering on cobblestones, the endless murmur of humanity that she had once found comforting. Now it felt hostile. Somewhere in this maze of streets, her brother was suffering. They went first to Sebastian's townhouse, where a flurry of messages awaited them. His solicitor had begun making inquiries. The debt had been called in by a creditor named Josiah Henley, a name that meant nothing to Rosalind, but that made Sebastian's expression darken. "Henley is a debt collector," he explained. "Not the original holder of the loan, but someone who purchases debts at a discount and then pursues them aggressively. He's known for his creative methods." "How does that connect to Blackwell?" "I don't know yet, but there must be a connection." Sebastian studied the papers spread across his desk. Henley wouldn't have known about Timothy's existence, let alone the old loan, without someone feeding him information. Someone who wanted to hurt you. The accomplice? Yes. His jaw tightened. "When we find out who did this, I will destroy them." The words should have alarmed her. Instead, she felt a fierce gratitude for his anger on her behalf. "First, we save Timothy," she said. "Then we destroy them." Sebastian looked at her for a long moment, something warm flickering in his grey eyes. "God, I love you." The words fell into the silence between them, unexpected, unplanned. Rosalind stared at him, her heart stuttering in her chest. "I didn't mean to say that." He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost boyish in his discomfort. "Not now, not like this. But it's true, so I won't take it back." "Sebastian, you don't have to respond." He held up a hand. "We have more important things to deal with. He shook his head. "I wanted you to know. Whatever happens today, whatever comes next, I wanted you to know." She crossed the room before she knew what she was doing. She took his face in her hands and kissed him, brief, fierce, full of everything she couldn't put into words. "Save my brother," she said against his lips, "and then we can talk about love." His arms came around her, pulling her close for one breathless moment. "I'll save him, I promise." And somehow, despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the knowledge of how badly this could all go wrong, she believed him. They arrived at the debtor's prison in Southwark as the morning sun struggled through the clouds. It was a grim building, grey and forbidding, with barred windows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Rosalind had seen it before from a distance, and had always walked faster when she passed. Now she walked toward it, Sebastian at her side, determination in every step. The guards were suspicious of a duke appearing at their door, but Sebastian's title and bearing, and the coins that changed hands with practised discretion, opened doors that would have remained closed to Rosalind alone. Within an hour they were being led through echoing corridors to a cramped cell where Timothy sat on a narrow cot, his face pale and his eyes dark with worry. "Rosie!" He leapt to his feet as she appeared at the bars. "You came. I knew you would come." "Of course I came." She reached through the bars to grip his hands, fighting tears. "Are you all right? Have they hurt you?" "I'm fine, just frightened and confused." His gaze flickered to Sebastian, who stood behind her. "Who?" "This is the Duke of Ashworth. He's helping me sort this out." Timothy's eyes widened. "The Duke of Rosie? What have you gotten yourself into?" "Something wonderful, I hope." Sebastian stepped forward, his expression softening as he looked at the young man. "Mr. Thorne, I've heard a great deal about you. Your sister thinks very highly of your abilities." "She's biased." But Timothy straightened a little, responding instinctively to Sebastian's manner. "Your Grace, I don't understand what's happening. The debt they're holding me for, I didn't even know it existed. Father signed something years ago, guaranteeing a loan for a business partner. The partner paid it off, or so we thought. But he didn't. Sebastian's voice was grim. The debt was sold to a collector who's been sitting on it, waiting for the right moment to call it in. The right moment. Timothy's face paled further. You mean someone wanted this to happen now? Someone planned this? Rosalind and Sebastian exchanged glances. We think so, she said. We think someone is trying to hurt me to force me to leave a position I've taken at His Grace's estate. Leave a Rosie, what position? What estate? The last I heard, you were working for the wool merchants. It's a long story. She squeezed his hands. I'll explain everything, I promise. But first, we need to get you out of here. The sum is £300. Timothy's voice cracked. Rosie, where are we going to find £300? You're not. Sebastian's tone brooked no argument. Miss Thorne, I know you said you wouldn't accept charity, but this is not charity. This is an investment. Rosalind turned to stare at him. An investment? Your brother is training to be a solicitor, yes? When he qualifies, I will have need of a solicitor I can trust, one who is outside the usual London circles, who owes his loyalty to me rather than to old connections and old money. His grey eyes held hers, steady and serious. I will pay his debt and fund his articles, and in exchange he will agree to work for me for 3 years after he qualifies. A fair exchange for all parties. Timothy's mouth had fallen open. Rosalind felt her own shock giving way to something else, admiration for the elegant solution, gratitude for the respect it showed her pride, and underneath it all, a love so fierce it almost frightened her. I don't know what to say, Timothy stammered. Say yes. Rosalind's voice was steady now. Say yes, and we can go home. Yes, yes, of course, yes. Timothy was almost laughing, relief and disbelief mingling on his young face. Your Grace, I don't know how to thank you. Thank your sister. Sebastian's gaze had not left Rosalind's face. She's the one who tracked me across London and demanded to be treated as an equal. If she hadn't done that, none of us would be here right now. The paperwork took hours. There were fees to pay, documents to sign, bureaucratic obstacles to overcome. But by late afternoon, Timothy walked out of the debtor's prison a free man, blinking in the pale sunlight like someone emerging from a nightmare. Rosalind held him for a long moment, her arms wrapped around her little brother, her eyes closed against the tears she refused to let fall. Thank you, she whispered to Timothy for surviving, to Sebastian for saving him, to whatever force in the universe had brought her to this moment. Now, Sebastian said quietly, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. We find out who did this. She looked up at him, at this man who had dismantled his walls for her, who had saved her brother not with charity but with partnership, who loved her enough to respect her pride, even when it would have been easier to override it. Together, she said. He smiled that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face and took her hand. Together. The three of them walked away from the prison into the uncertain streets of London, and despite everything that remained unresolved, the accomplice still hidden at Ashworth Park, the conspiracy still unexplained, the future still unwritten, Rosalind felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. The evidence came together in Sebastian's London study, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their places. Timothy sat in a corner, still pale from his ordeal, but insisting on being present, his legal training already proving useful as he helped them organize the documentation. Sebastian's solicitor, a silver-haired man named Pemberton, who had served the family for 30 years, had worked through the night to trace the connections between Josiah Henley, the debt collector, and the household at Ashworth Park. The payments to Henley came through an intermediary, Pemberton explained, spreading papers across the desk. A man named Wilcox, who works as a clerk for a shipping company in Bristol.
But Wilcox's mother is employed as a housekeeper, Rosalind finished, her voice flat, at Ashworth Park. Sebastian went very still. Mrs. Aldridge. The name hung in the air between them. Mrs. Aldridge had been with the family for 12 years, had nursed Marguerite through her husband's illness and death, had watched Edmund and Clara grow from infants to children. She had been above suspicion, part of the invisible foundation that kept the household running. "Are you certain?" Sebastian's voice was carefully controlled,
but Rosalind could see the betrayal beneath the surface. The accounting records confirm it. She pulled out the documents she had been analyzing before the crisis with Timothy interrupted her work. The household irregularities I found: inflated grocery bills, phantom maintenance expenses, they all flow through accounts Mrs. Aldridge manages. She's been skimming small amounts for years, probably at Blackwell's direction originally. When I started investigating, she must have panicked and contacted Blackwell to arrange the attack on your brother. Sebastian's jaw tightened, using her son as an intermediary to maintain distance from the scheme. Timothy leaned forward. "Can we prove it? Prove it well enough for legal action?" Pemberton nodded slowly. "With these records and the connection to Henley, we have enough to bring charges. The question is whether His Grace wishes to pursue that course." Sebastian was silent for a long moment, staring at the papers spread before him. Rosalind watched his face, saw the war playing out behind his grey eyes, the desire for justice warring with the cost of public scandal, the betrayal by a trusted servant weighed against the satisfaction of accountability. "We pursue it," he said finally. "All of it. Blackwell, Mrs. Aldridge, anyone else involved. I will not—" His voice roughened. "I will not let them believe they can target the people I care about without consequence." Rosalind's heart clenched at the fierceness in his words. He was doing this for her, for Timothy, for the principle that cruelty should not go unpunished. She had spent 3 years believing that accepting help made you weak, that needing someone meant losing yourself. But watching Sebastian marshal his resources in defense of her family, she understood something she had refused to see before. Partnership was not weakness. It was strength doubled. It was facing the world with someone at your side instead of always standing alone. "There's something else," Pemberton said, interrupting her thoughts. "In the course of tracing these connections, my investigators discovered that Blackwell has been in contact with several other former employees who left the estate under questionable circumstances. It appears he was building a network, people in various positions who could feed him information or assist with schemes." "How extensive?" Sebastian asked. "We're still determining that, but it seems your estate has been more compromised than we initially realized." Pemberton hesitated. "Your Grace, I would recommend a complete review of all staff, both at Ashworth Park and here in London. Someone of Miss Thorne's abilities would be invaluable for such an undertaking." Sebastian turned to look at Rosalind. In his eyes, she saw not just the question about the work, but something deeper, a hope he was trying not to show, a future he wanted but wouldn't demand. "Would you be willing?" he asked quietly. "Not as debt repayment that's been more than satisfied, as a genuine position. One you could hold as long as you wished or leave whenever you chose." The offer hung between them, laden with implications. A position at his estate meant a life near him, a future that might grow into something more. "I need to think," she said. "I need time, I know." He nodded, though she saw the flicker of disappointment he tried to hide. "Take whatever time you need. The offer will remain open." Timothy cleared his throat. "I don't mean to interrupt, but Rosie, can I talk to you? Alone?" She followed her brother into the corridor, leaving Sebastian and Pemberton to continue their planning. Timothy led her to a small sitting room, closed the door, and turned to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You love him," Timothy said. It wasn't a question. "Timothy, I'm not blind, Rosie. I've watched you with him all day. The way you look at each other, the way he defers to you, the way you—" He shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "I've never seen you like this. You're actually happy. This isn't the time to discuss. This is exactly the time." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "For 3 years, you've sacrificed everything for me. Your comfort, your prospects, your chance at any kind of normal life. You worked yourself to exhaustion to pay father's debts and keep a roof over my head. You never once complained, never once asked for anything for yourself. You're my brother. I would do it again." "I know you would. That's the problem." His grip tightened on her hands. "Rosie, when are you going to stop sacrificing and start living? When are you going to admit that you deserve to be happy too?" "I don't know if I can—" Her voice caught. "I don't know if I can be what he needs. I wasn't raised to be a duchess, Timothy. I don't know the first thing about running a great household, about society, about any of it. You know how to be brilliant. You know how to be brave. You know how to love fiercely and completely." Timothy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And from what I've seen, that's exactly what he needs. Someone who sees him as a person, not as a title. Someone who challenges him instead of fawning over him. Someone who tracked him across London because she refused to be beholden to anyone." A wet laugh escaped her. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from my sister." He pulled her into a hug, his arms strung around her. "Stop running, Rosie. You've been running from needing anyone since Mother died. It's time to stop." She held on to him, this brother she had protected for so long, and let his words sink into the places where her fear still lived. He was right. She had been running not from Sebastian, but from the vulnerability that loving him would require. But she was tired of running, tired of walls, tired of being alone in her fortress of independence. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither does he. That's what makes you perfect for each other."
Timothy pulled back, grinning at her with their father's irrepressible optimism. "Now go talk to him before he convinces himself you're going to refuse." She wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and went to find Sebastian. She found him in the garden behind the townhouse, standing beneath a trellis covered in the last roses of autumn. The afternoon light caught the silver at his temples, and she thought of all the burdens he had carried, all the years he had spent alone behind his walls. He heard her footsteps and turned, his expression guarded, braced for rejection. "I have conditions," she said. Something flickered in his eyes, hope, quickly suppressed. "You always have conditions. This time they're important." She stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "If I accept your offer, if I stay, it cannot be as your employee. Not really." "Then as what?" "As your partner." She met his gaze, letting him see everything she had been hiding. "In the work, in the estate, in—" She faltered, suddenly afraid. "In what, Rosalind?" His voice was soft, almost tender. "In everything." The words came out as barely a whisper. "You said you loved me. Did you mean it? I have never meant anything more in my life. Then I need you to understand I don't know how to be a duchess. I don't know how to navigate society or manage great households, or do any of the things that a woman in your position should know. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to embarrass you. I'm going to be stubborn and difficult and impossible sometimes. I'm counting on it." His voice roughened. "Rosalind,
Do you think I want a woman who knows how to curtsy properly and says the right things at dinner parties? I want you. Exactly as you are. Stubborn and brilliant and fierce and... She kissed him. His arms came around her immediately, pulling her close with an urgency that took her breath away. The kiss was nothing like their first tentative, uncertain. This was a declaration, a promise, a claiming that went both ways. She poured everything she had been afraid to feel into that kiss, and felt him answer with equal intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you're staying?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability beneath the attempted humor. "This means I'm staying." She pulled back enough to look into his grey eyes. "I love you, Sebastian. I think I've loved you since you looked at me across your desk and told me I was the most infuriating woman you'd ever met." "You are." His smile transformed his entire face. "And I wouldn't have you any other way." "I still want the position," she said. "The real work, auditing the accounts, building proper systems. I didn't come this far to become a decorative wife." "You will never be decorative. You will be indispensable." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "And you will be my partner in everything. I promise you that." "Then I suppose we should discuss the terms of our arrangement." He laughed a real laugh, full and warm, the kind she suspected he hadn't allowed himself in years. "Only you would negotiate a marriage contract in a rose garden." "Marriage?" Her heart stuttered. "You're proposing?" "I'm—" He stopped, suddenly uncertain. "I meant to do this properly. Dinner, perhaps. Candlelight. A ring. I have my grandmother's ring, you know. Marguerite has been keeping it for years, waiting for me to—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "I'm making a mess of this." "You're making a perfect mess of it." She caught his hand and held it between both of hers. "And yes." "Yes." "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll build a life with you at Ashworth Park, irritating you and challenging you and refusing to accept charity until we're both old and grey." She laughed, her heart suddenly lighter than it had been in years. "Well, greyer, in your case." "I earned that grey." But he was smiling, his eyes bright with a joy that made him look almost young. "You're really saying yes?" "I'm really saying yes. Now kiss me again before I come to my senses." He kissed her again, thoroughly, until they were both laughing and breathless and clinging to each other in the autumn garden. And when he finally drew back, she saw on his face something she had never expected to see, their uncomplicated happiness. "We should tell the others," he said. "Marguerite will be insufferable. She's been predicting this since the moment she met you." "And Timothy?" "Already approves, I suspect. He gave me a very pointed look when you left the study." Rosalind laughed. "We've been outmaneuvered by our siblings. We've been seen by our siblings." He laced his fingers through hers. Apparently, we were the only ones who couldn't tell how inevitable this was. They walked back into the house hand in hand, stepping from the cold autumn air into the warmth within. And as they went to share their news with the people who loved them, Rosalind felt the last of her walls crumbling away. She had spent 3 years believing that needing no one made her strong. But she had been wrong. True strength was trusting someone enough to let them in. True strength was choosing love over fear. The wedding took place at Ashworth Park on a clear December morning, with frost glittering on the gardens and a fire blazing in the chapel's ancient hearth. The weeks between Sebastian's proposal and their marriage had been filled with a whirlwind of activity. They had returned to Ashworth Park to find Mrs. Aldridge already fled. Someone had warned her of the investigation. But Sebastian's network of contacts eventually tracked her down,
and she now faced charges alongside Blackwell for their conspiracy. Rosalind had thrown herself into the work of auditing the estate, this time not as repayment for a debt, but as preparation for her future role. Sebastian had been right. The
corruption was more extensive than anyone had realized. But with each problem she uncovered, she also found solutions. The estate, she was beginning to understand, was not just a burden to be managed. It was a living thing, a community of tenants and staff and traditions that stretched back centuries. She was learning to love it, almost as much as she loved its master. The chapel at Ashworth Park was small but beautiful, its stone walls softened by tapestries and its windows catching the winter light. Marguerite had insisted on filling every surface with white roses and holly, transforming the space into something from a fairy tale. "Nervous?" Timothy asked, appearing at Rosalind's side as she waited in the small anteroom. "Terrified?" She smoothed her dress cream silk, simple but elegant, chosen by Marguerite from a London modiste who had been scandalized that a duke's bride was shopping for her own wedding gown. "What if I trip? What if I say the wrong words? What if you walk up that aisle and marry the man who loves you more than anything in the world?" Timothy grinned. "I think you'll survive that, Rosie. When did you become the calm one?" "Since my brilliant sister arranged for me to receive an excellent legal education and a guaranteed position with one of the most influential families in England." He kissed her cheek. "I'm terrified too, if it helps, but also happier than I've ever been. For both of us." The music began, a simple melody played on the chapel's old organ. Rosalind took Timothy's arm and let him lead her toward the doors. "Ready?" he asked. She thought of all the steps that had brought her here, the debts she had struggled to pay, the letter that had changed everything, the fury that had driven her to track down an anonymous benefactor and demand accountability, the man who had looked at her across his desk with surprise and irritation, and something she hadn't recognized until much later. "Ready," she said. The doors opened. Sebastian stood at the altar, his grey eyes finding hers immediately. He was wearing formal black, the clothes emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the striking angles of his face. But it was his expression that caught her breath, joy and wonder, and a love so visible that she felt tears prick at her eyes. She walked toward him, Timothy steady at her side, the small congregation fading to a blur at the edges of her vision. All she could see was Sebastian. All she had ever needed to see was Sebastian. When she reached him, he took her hands in his. His grip was warm and strong, an anchor in the swirl of emotion. "You came," he murmured, too soft for anyone else to hear. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought I might wake up and find this was all a dream." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "A very good dream that I didn't deserve." "You deserve everything," she said. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." The vicar began the service, the familiar words washing over them. Rosalind listened and responded, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overflow. She heard Sebastian make his vows, his deep voice carrying through the chapel, every word a promise she knew he would keep. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Behind them, Clara cheered loudly, and Edmund made a disgusted noise, and Marguerite laughed through her tears. They walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, Duchess and Duke. And as they emerged into the cold December sunshine, Rosalind felt the last traces of her old fear falling away. She had spent 3 years believing she had to stand alone. Now she understood that standing together was not surrender. It was victory. The wedding breakfast was held in Ashworth Park's great dining room, the long table laden with food and flowers, and the laughter of people who loved each other. Rosalind sat at Sebastian's side, marvelling at how natural it felt to be here, to be his, to be home. Clara had insisted on sitting between them, and spent most of the meal showing Rosalind the drawings she had made to commemorate the occasion. They featured a princess with improbable amounts of red hair marrying a prince who looked suspiciously like a horse. "It's the most beautiful wedding portrait I've ever seen," Rosalind said solemnly. "Uncle Sebastian looks funny because I couldn't remember how to draw crowns," Clara explained. "But Mamma says dukes don't wear crowns anyway, so it doesn't matter. Your Uncle Sebastian is handsome even without a crown." "He is?" Clara studied her uncle critically. "I suppose. For someone old." Sebastian choked on his wine. Rosalind laughed, reaching past Clara to squeeze his hand. "Don't worry, Your Grace. I've always been partial to distinguished older gentlemen. I am 32, ancient, practically decrepit." He caught her hand and kissed it, his grey eyes dancing with humour. "You are going to keep me humble, aren't you? It's my sacred duty as your wife." The afternoon faded into evening, the celebration continuing as candles were lit and toasts were made. Timothy spoke eloquently about his sister's stubbornness and heart, making Rosalind cry despite her best efforts. Marguerite told embarrassing stories about Sebastian's childhood that made him groan and hide his face in his hands. Even Edmund, shy and serious, stood up to announce that he was glad his uncle had finally found someone who would argue with him properly. When the hour grew late and the children were carried off to bed, Sebastian led Rosalind onto the terrace that overlooked the frost-kissed gardens. The moon was rising, painting everything in silver, and their breath misted in the cold air. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close against his side. "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, incredibly happy." "You said that earlier, before the ceremony." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "What are you terrified of?" "That this is too good to be true. That I'll wake up tomorrow and find it was all a dream." She echoed his earlier words deliberately, watching his eyes soften with recognition. "That I don't deserve this." "You deserve everything," he said, throwing her own words back at her. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." He kissed her then, slow and deep, with all the time in the world. The cold nipped at her exposed skin, but Sebastian's warmth enveloped her, and she thought that she would gladly stand here forever, if it meant being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless and laughing. "We should go inside," she said, "before we freeze to death on our wedding night." "In a moment." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I want to remember this. The moonlight on your hair. The way you looked at me when you walked up that aisle. The fact that you're here, that you're real, that you chose me." "I would choose you again," she said. "Every time. In every life. Even knowing I'm old and practically decrepit. Especially then." She rose on her toes to kiss him again. "Distinguished older gentlemen are my weakness." His laugh was warm against her lips. Then he swept her up into his arms, ignoring her startled squeak of protest, and carried her inside, up the sweeping staircase, toward the future they would build together. That night, as they lay tangled together in the great bed that had belonged to 7 generations of Ashworth dukes, Rosalind traced patterns on Sebastian's chest and marvelled at how far they had both come. "I never thanked you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For paying my father's debts, for refusing to let me dismiss you, for seeing something in me worth—" She paused, searching for words. "Worth everything?" He kissed her hair. "You're right. You should thank me. My brilliance and foresight, clearly. She silenced him with a kiss. "Don't ruin the moment." "Yes, dear." She laughed, settling more closely against him. Outside, snow had begun to fall, light flurries that dusted the gardens in white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and Sebastian's heartbeat was steady beneath her ear. This was home. This was love. This was everything she had never known she wanted, and she had earned it, not through suffering, but through the courage to accept it. 7 years later, Rosalind sat in the study at Ashworth Park, her study now, filled with her books and her papers and the organized chaos that was the signature of her working style, going over the quarterly accounts. Sophie was on her lap, 6 years old, and already showing her mother's aptitude for numbers. She was practicing her sums on a piece of scrap paper, tongue sticking out with concentration as she puzzled through the arithmetic. "Mamma, is 12 and 7 19? Very good, darling. What about 14 and 8? Sophie's brow furrowed. 22? Perfect. Who? You're going to be better at this than I am. Papa says you're the best at numbers in the whole world. Papa is biased." But Rosalind smiled, kissing the top of Sophie's dark hair, Sebastian's hair, though she had her mother's green eyes. "He also says you're the smartest 6-year-old in England, and I happen to agree with him about that." A crash from somewhere in the house was followed by high-pitched shrieking and deeper laughter. Sophie's head came up, alert as a hunting dog. "That's James and Catherine. They're in the stables again." "How can you tell?" "James only screams like that when the horses lick him." Sophie was already sliding off her mother's lap. "Can I go see? Can I?" "Go on, but don't let them get into too much trouble." Sophie raced out of the study, her careful arithmetic abandoned for the more pressing matter of sibling chaos. Rosalind watched her go with a heart full of love so intense it almost hurt. 3 children, a study of her own, a place in the world that she had built alongside the man she loved. Sometimes she still woke in the night convinced it was all a dream, that she would open her eyes to find herself back in her cramped London lodgings, counting pennies for coal. Sebastian always knew when those nights came. He would pull her close, murmur reassurances against her hair, remind her with his presence that this life was real and true, and theirs. She turned back to the accounts, but before she could focus, the study door opened again. Sebastian stood in the doorway, bits of hay in his hair and a twin clinging to each leg. James and Catherine were 4 years old, wild as spring storms, and utterly devoted to their father. They had inherited Rosalind's auburn hair and Sebastian's grey eyes, a combination that was going to cause considerable trouble when they were older. "We've been helping with the horses," James announced. "I can see that." Rosalind rose from her desk, crossing to pluck hay from Sebastian's hair. "You appear to have brought half the stable with you." "The horses like Papa," Catherine said solemnly. "They try to eat his hair." "Well, his hair is very distinguished." Rosalind caught Sebastian's eye and saw the silent laughter there, "even if it is turning grey." "I earned that grey," he said, the same words he had spoken on the day he proposed. "I believe someone once called it distinguished. Someone was trying to make you feel better about your advanced age. I am 39. Ancient." She kissed him lightly. "Decrepit, practically fossilized." The twins giggled, not understanding the joke but sensing the affection beneath it. Sebastian reached out and tugged gently at a strand of Rosalind's hair, his eyes warm. "Timothy and Margaret are here," he said. "I saw their carriage coming up the drive." "Already? They weren't supposed to arrive until—" She glanced at the clock and realized with a start that she had been working for 3 hours without noticing. "I lost track of time." "You always do when you have numbers to play with." But he was smiling. "Come greet your brother. Sophie is already demanding that he play chess with her." They walked together toward the entrance hall, the twins racing ahead with their usual abandon. Through the windows, Rosalind could see the December afternoon fading toward evening, the gardens touched with frost, the lake a sheet of silver in the distance. 7 years. It seemed both longer and shorter than she could account for. So much had changed. Timothy was now a successful solicitor with his own firm, married to a lovely woman named Margaret, who shared his passion for justice. Marguerite had found love again, with a neighbouring baronet who adored her children and made her laugh. Edmund was at Eton, growing into a thoughtful young man. Clara, now 12, was as dramatic and passionate as ever, already declaring that she would never marry and would instead become an explorer. And Rosalind had found her place, not as a charity case, not as a burden, but as a partner. Sebastian's equal in everything that mattered. The entrance hall was chaos when they arrived. Timothy swinging Sophie through the air while she shrieked with delight, Margaret laughing at something Marguerite had said, the twins attempting to climb their uncle like a tree. Sebastian caught Rosalind's hand as they stood watching the controlled mayhem. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The life you might have had if you hadn't tracked me down that day?" She thought about it seriously, as she always did when he asked, and he asked more often than she expected, still sometimes uncertain that he deserved the happiness they had built. "I would have paid off the debt eventually," she said. "Kept working for Hartley's. Watched Timothy establish himself. Grown old alone in my lodgings, telling myself I didn't need anyone. That doesn't sound so terrible. It sounds safe." She leaned into his side, feeling his arm come around her. "But it also sounds empty, small, a life lived behind walls." She looked up at him, at this man who had dismantled his own walls for her, who had taught her that vulnerability was not weakness. "I wouldn't trade what we have for all the safety in the world." His grey eyes softened. Even now, after 7 years of marriage and 3 children, and countless small battles and great joys, he could still look at her in a way that made her breath catch. "I love you," he said. "Have I told you that today?" "Only 4 times. You're slacking." "I love you," he repeated, kissing her forehead. "I love you. I love you. There. Caught up. You're ridiculous. I prefer distinguished." She laughed, pulling him down for a proper kiss that was interrupted by James demanding to know why grown-ups had to do that so much. They broke apart, still laughing, and waded into the happy chaos of their family. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the adults had lingered over dinner and conversation, Rosalind slipped away to the terrace where Sebastian had first proposed. The moon was rising again, painting the frost-touched gardens in silver, and her breath misted in the cold air. She thought of the woman she had been 7 years ago, proud, defensive, convinced that needing anyone was weakness. That woman would not have recognized herself now settled, fulfilled, surrounded by people she loved and who loved her in return. Arms came around her from behind, warm and familiar. Sebastian rested his chin on her shoulder, looking out at the gardens with her. "What are you thinking?" "That I should have thanked you," she said, "the first time we met, instead of shouting." "We've had this conversation before." "I know." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "But I mean it differently now. I was so afraid of owing anyone anything, so afraid that accepting help would somehow diminish me. It took me years to understand that some debts aren't about money at all. What are they about? Love." She touched his face, traced the lines that 7 years of laughter had etched beside his eyes. "You taught me that. That love is not a transaction. It's a gift freely given, with no expectation of return. And it doesn't diminish you to accept it. It makes you more. My stubborn, brilliant, impossible wife." His voice was rough with emotion. "I love you more every day. Is that normal? Shouldn't I be used to you by now? I hope you never get used to me. No chance of that. He kissed her, slow and sweet, with the confidence of 7 years and the wonder of the first time. Come inside. It's cold, and I believe I owe you at least 3 more declarations of love before midnight. She laughed, letting him lead her back into the warmth. Behind them, the moon continued its rise over Ashworth Park, silvering the gardens, the lake, the house that had become her home. Some debts, Rosalind had learned, could never be repaid, not because they were too large, but because they were made of love. And love was not a transaction. It was a gift freely given.